It was a peaceful evening in Atlanta, the kind of day that seemed perfectly ordinary. The sun had just begun to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and soft pink. The city buzzed quietly, people heading home after long hours at work. Among them was Amara Johnson, a 19-year-old college student with big dreams and a kind heart. She had just finished her shift at a small bookstore downtown, a place she loved because it was quiet and full of stories. Books made her feel safe. They reminded her that even ordinary people could have extraordinary stories. Amara lived a simple life. She wasn't rich or famous, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. She had been raised with discipline, respect, and strength, values her father taught her since she was little. What most people didn't know, though, was that her father, Colonel David Johnson, wasn't just any man. He was one of the most respected and feared Delta Force commanders in the country, a soldier who had faced some of the most dangerous missions around the world. But to Amara, he was simply Dad. The man who made her pancakes on weekends, who laughed at his own jokes, and who told her bedtime stories about courage, not fairy tales. He taught her how to stay calm in chaos, to never let anger control her, and most importantly, to stand up for what's right no matter how hard it gets. That evening, as she walked out of the bookstore, the air was cool and a light breeze brushed against her face. She smiled, adjusting her small backpack and unlocking her old silver sedan. She had saved money for months to buy it. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. Music played softly from the car speakers as she drove through familiar streets, humming to herself. Her mind wandered to her upcoming exam, to her friends who had invited her out for dinner, and to her father, who was away on a military assignment overseas. Even though he wasn't around often, Amara never felt alone. He called her every night, no matter how far he was, to check on her. "Keep your head high, baby girl," he would always say. "You come from strong people." Those words echoed in her mind often, especially when things got tough. As she stopped at a red light, she noticed two kids playing basketball on the corner, laughing as the ball bounced down the street. An elderly woman crossed slowly in front of her car, carrying groceries. Amara smiled and waved, waiting patiently for her to pass. She was kind, polite, and respectful, the kind of young woman any parent would be proud of. But beneath her calm personality was a spark of determination. She wanted to follow in her father's footsteps and serve her country one day. Not because she liked danger, but because she believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. She admired her father's strength, but also his heart, the way he treated even his enemies with honor. As she drove closer to her neighborhood, the sun dipped lower and streetlights flickered on. She turned down a quiet road lined with trees. The rhythmic hum of her car and the faint chirping of crickets filled the air. It was a moment of peace, one she didn't know wouldn't last much longer. Inside the car, Amara was lost in her thoughts, planning the next day. Finish her essay, call her father, maybe go jogging in the morning. She didn't notice the police car parked a few streets away. She didn't notice the two officers sitting inside, bored, waiting for something or someone light to catch their attention. As she turned onto the main road, one of the officers noticed her car and whispered something to his partner. They exchanged a look, then pulled out slowly, following her from a distance. Amara kept driving, unaware of what was about to unfold. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her best friend, Tasha. "Girl, you working too hard. Come out this weekend." Amara smiled and texted back, "Maybe. Gotta finish my paper first." She set her phone down and focused on the road, turning up the music slightly. An R&B song her dad used to sing badly, but always made her laugh. Everything felt normal, until she saw the red and blue lights flash behind her. Her heart jumped. She looked in the rearview mirror, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" she murmured to herself. She wasn't speeding, her seatbelt was on, and she hadn't broken any traffic rules. Still, she slowly pulled over to the side, just like her father had taught her. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Be polite. Keep your hands visible and speak clearly." Her father's voice echoed in her head. She rolled down her window as two officers approached. One was tall and heavy-set, the other younger, but with a cold, suspicious look in his eyes. The taller one leaned down, his flashlight beaming into her face. "License and registration," he said flatly. Amara handed them over quickly, her hands slightly trembling. "Of course, officer. Is something wrong?" she asked softly. The man didn't answer. Instead, he looked at her papers and then at her again. "Where you coming from?" "From work. The bookstore downtown." He smirked. "At this hour? You sure about that?" Amara blinked, unsure what he meant. "Yes, sir. I work until 8. The younger officer circled her car slowly, peering through the back window. Something in his expression made her uneasy. For a moment, the air felt heavy. The ordinary evening that had started so peacefully was slowly turning into something else, something darker. Amara's pulse quickened. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a night she would never forget. A night that would test everything her father had taught her about courage, control, and standing strong in the face of fear. The flashing red and blue lights painted the dark street in color. For a second, Amara thought it was just an ambulance passing by. But when she looked in her mirror, her stomach dropped. The lights were behind her. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't on her phone. She had done nothing wrong. Still, the sound of the siren pierced through her calm thoughts, echoing inside her chest like a warning bell. She slowed down and pulled to the side of the road, just like her father had always told her to. Her heart beat faster with each breath. The street was quiet. Only the faint hum of insects and the faraway sound of traffic filled the night air. "Stay calm, Amara," she whispered to herself. "Be polite. Be smart." The two officers stepped out of their car. Their silhouettes appeared under the streetlight, one tall and heavy, the other younger and restless. The older one, Officer Miller, walked with slow, heavy steps, his flashlight cutting through the dark and straight into her car. The younger one, Officer Harris, had his hand resting on his holster. A small detail Amara noticed right away. Miller tapped on her window with his flashlight. "License and registration," he said in a hard, flat voice. Amara nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "Yes, sir. 1 second." She reached slowly for her purse on the passenger seat, making sure her movements were calm and visible. Her father had drilled that into her since she first got her license. "Move slow, keep your hands visible, stay respectful." She handed over her documents with a polite smile. "Here you go, officer. Did I do something wrong?" Miller stared at her ID for a long moment, then looked back at her. "You got a broken taillight," he said. His tone made it sound more like an accusation than information. Amara blinked, surprised. "Oh, really? I didn't know that. I'll get it fixed tomorrow." The officer didn't reply. He just kept looking at her, not at the ID anymore, but at her. His eyes carried that kind of arrogance people wore when they thought they had power over you. Meanwhile, Officer Harris was walking around her car, shining his flashlight inside like he was searching for something. "You got any drugs, weapons, or alcohol in here?" he called out. Amara shook her head quickly. "No, sir, nothing like that." He snorted. "You sure? You look nervous." She swallowed hard. I've never been pulled over before." The older officer leaned a little closer to her window. "Step out of the car." Amara froze. "Sir, did I do something wrong?" "Step out of the car," he repeated, louder this time. Her breath hitched. She wanted to call her father, but she knew better. Any sudden movement might be seen the wrong way. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, the cool night air brushing against her skin. Her heart was racing now. They had no reason to treat her like this. She had been respectful, calm, and cooperative. But something in their tone told her that this wasn't about a taillight anymore. "Put your hands on the hood," Harris said, walking closer. Her voice shook. "Officers, I really haven't done anything." "Do what I said," he barked. She did as told, her hands flat on the hood of her car, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The metal was cold under her palms. She could see her reflection in the windshield, scared, confused, and trying not to cry. Harris patted her pockets roughly, searching her as if she were some kind of criminal. Amara winced but stayed quiet. The older officer smirked. "What's your name again?" "Amara Johnson." she said softly. He nodded slowly. Johnson, you got family around here? Yes, sir, my father. What's he do? He asked, his tone mocking now. Amara hesitated. He's in the military. The two men exchanged a look. Harris chuckled. Oh, military, huh? So what? You think you're special? Amara shook her head quickly. No, sir. I didn't say that. I'm just telling the truth. The officers laughed quietly to each other, the kind of laugh that made her skin crawl. Miller circled back toward the patrol car and whispered something to his partner. Amara couldn't hear the words, but she saw the expression on his face, that cruel smirk that said he was enjoying this. Turn around, Harris ordered again. Amara's patience began to crack. Officer, I'm trying to cooperate, but please tell me what I did wrong. He took a step closer, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You'll find out soon enough. Maybe you just got the wrong attitude. Her eyes widened. She could feel tears forming, but she refused to let them fall. She remembered her father's voice in her mind again. You are stronger than fear, Amara. Don't let it break you. That was when she reached for her phone in her pocket, slow and careful, and pressed record. The red light blinked on, capturing everything, the voices, the threats, the tone, the injustice. She didn't yell or fight. She just stood there, trembling but firm, knowing that truth would be her weapon. As the camera rolled quietly, Officer Miller glanced back and noticed. What are you doing? He demanded. Just recording, Amara said calmly, for my safety. For a brief moment, both men froze. Their confidence flickered, replaced by something else, uncertainty. Miller scoffed. You think that phone's gonna save you? Amara met his eyes for the first time, her voice steady now. No, sir, but it'll tell the truth. The silence that followed was thick and tense. Even the crickets had stopped chirping. The younger officer looked away, and for the first time that night, Amara realized something. Fear was no longer hers. It belonged to them. For a moment, everything was still. The only sound Amara could hear was her own heartbeat, heavy and uneven. The cold night air pressed against her skin as if the whole world was watching, holding its breath. The two officers stood in front of her, waiting for her to flinch, to make a mistake, to give them a reason to prove their power. But she didn't move. She kept her back straight, her hands trembling only slightly as she held her phone steady. The small red recording light on her screen blinked like a heartbeat, a quiet symbol of courage she didn't even know she had. Inside, she was terrified. Her mind raced through a storm of thoughts. What if they hurt me? What if no one believes me? What if I don't make it home? But then, another voice rose inside her, calm, deep, and familiar. Her father's voice. Courage isn't the absence of fear, baby girl, he used to say. It's standing tall despite it. Those words echoed through her like a shield. She remembered being a child sitting on her father's lap as he told her stories of the battlefield, not about killing, but about protecting. He told her that a true warrior doesn't start fights, they end them with honor. And now, in this dark street, that lesson became real. Turn that camera off, Officer Miller snapped. Amara looked up, her voice shaking but firm. I'm allowed to record, sir. This is for my safety. The officer stepped closer, his shadow falling over her face. I said turn it off, he barked. Amara didn't move. She took a small breath. No, sir, she whispered. I won't. That single sentence changed everything. Miller's eyes narrowed. Harris shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward their car. The power in the air had shifted. The fear they had been feeding on was now slipping away, replaced by something else. Amara wasn't just a scared young woman anymore. She was standing like a soldier's daughter, calm, aware, unbroken. Listen, miss, Harris said, his tone softening just slightly. We can sort this out, just... But Amara cut him off gently. I'm not doing anything wrong. You said it was a broken taillight. I'll fix it tomorrow. There's no reason for all this. Miller scoffed. You think you know the law? She met his gaze without blinking. "I know my rights." There was no anger in her tone, only quiet strength. It caught him off guard. He took a step back, muttering something under his breath. Amara didn't know it, but the camera on her phone was already streaming live. Her best friend Tasha had seen the notification pop up. Amara had set her phone to automatically stream if she ever pressed record for more than 10 seconds. Within minutes, the video began spreading online. Back at the station, other officers started noticing. Calls began coming in. But on that empty street, none of them knew yet that the world was watching. Amara took another deep breath, forcing her hands to stop shaking. The more she stood there, the stronger she felt. Her fear didn't disappear, and it transformed. It became focus, purpose, and control. She thought about her father again, how he had faced men with weapons and never flinched. How he had once told her, "Even in darkness, keep your light, it blinds evil." That's what she was doing now. Her phone's small red light was her light in the dark. Miller turned toward Harris. "This is getting messy," he muttered. "Let's run her plates and get it over with." As he walked back to the patrol car, Amara stood still, her breath heavy but steady. Harris lingered behind, looking at her with something almost like guilt. "You should just listen," he said quietly. "Makes things easier." Amara looked at him, her eyes soft but unyielding. Maybe easy isn't always right. That simple answer silenced him. He looked away. Minutes passed like hours. The red and blue lights still flashed, washing her face in harsh color. But Amara's fear had changed shape, no longer a trembling kind, but one that lived quietly behind her strength. When Miller came back, his voice wasn't as loud. "Everything checks out," he said, handing back her ID. She took it calmly. "Thank you, officer." He hesitated, studying her expression. For a second, something like uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the realization that she wasn't the easy target he thought she was. "Next time," he said finally, "get that light fixed." "I will," she replied. "Next time, maybe talk with respect." The words came out before she could stop them. Not angry, not rude, just honest. Miller froze, staring at her. Harris looked down, pretending not to hear. Then, without another word, they walked back to their car. The sound of their doors closing echoed down the street like the end of a storm. When they drove away, Amara stayed still for a long moment. Her knees felt weak, her chest tight. She leaned against her car, closing her eyes as tears finally fell. Not from fear, but from relief. She looked down at her phone. The screen was still recording. The counter showed 10 minutes and 38 seconds. She pressed stop and whispered to herself, "Dad would have been proud." She didn't know yet that those 10 minutes would soon change everything, that her small act of courage would reach millions, and that somewhere, thousands of miles away, her father was already on his way home. Thousands of miles away, in a dusty military base hidden deep in the Middle East, Colonel David Johnson was finishing his evening rounds. The desert sun had already disappeared behind the horizon, leaving a dim orange glow across the sand. The air was still hot, and the only sounds were distant radio chatter and the hum of generators. David moved like a man who had seen too much of war but still carried discipline in every step. He was respected, even feared by his men, not because he was harsh, but because he was unbreakable. Every soldier knew, if Colonel Johnson gave an order, it was because he had already walked through the fire himself. But no matter how strong or battle-hardened he was, nothing could prepare him for what was about to happen that night. He sat in his small office, writing a report. His hands were rough, his eyes tired, but his mind was focused. On his desk was a photo, a young woman smiling in her graduation gown. Amara, his pride, his reason, the one part of his life that reminded him what he was fighting for. Every night before heading to bed, he looked at that picture and whispered a quiet prayer. "Keep her safe, Lord. Just keep her safe." Then, the phone rang. At first, he didn't think much of it. Calls were common, updates from command, mission briefings, urgent requests. But when he picked it up and heard the panicked voice on the other end, his heart sank. "Colonel Johnson, this is Mrs. Thompson. Your neighbor back home, I don't mean to scare you, but something's happening. It's Amara." The sound of his daughter's name hit him harder than a bullet. His pen dropped from his hand. "What about Amara?" His voice was calm but sharp, the voice of a soldier forcing himself not to panic. She got pulled over by the police near Maple Street," the old woman stammered. "It looked bad, sir. I saw 2 officers shouting at her, and she was recording them. I think they were threatening her." David stood up so fast his chair crashed backward. His breath shortened. "Did they hurt her?" "I don't know," she said softly. "I don't think so, but she looked terrified. She's home now, I believe. But you should check. I saw the video online. It's everywhere." He froze. "What video?" "Someone was live streaming it," she whispered. "It's all over the internet. People are sharing it, saying those cops went too far." For a second, the whole room seemed to blur. The colonel gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. His heart pounded, not with anger yet, but with something deeper. Fear. He'd faced enemies with guns, bombs, and knives. But this was different. This was his daughter. His little girl who still called him Dad in that soft voice every night before bed. He quickly grabbed his laptop, fingers trembling as he opened his email. There it was, a link from one of his soldiers who had already seen the video. "Sir, is this your daughter?" He clicked it. The screen lit up with the flashing red and blue lights. And there she was, standing by her car, her hands trembling but her voice steady. He watched as the officers yelled at her, as one of them reached for her arm as she stood there with courage he didn't even know she had. "Don't you move," one of them barked. Then came her soft, brave voice through the speaker. "I'm recording this. For my safety." David's jaw clenched. His chest burned. He had trained soldiers for years to protect the innocent, not terrorize them. And now watching his own daughter face that kind of threat, every muscle in his body tensed with fury. He could almost hear his heartbeat in his ears. Then he saw it. The moment when she refused to back down. Her eyes, calm but unshaken. Her courage reminded him of his wife, strong, fearless, gone too soon. A tear escaped his eye, something his men had never seen. He wiped it away roughly and whispered, "That's my girl." But beneath the pride was something far stronger, a storm. The kind of storm that builds quietly before it destroys everything in its path. He stood up, walked to the window and stared out at the dark horizon. His voice was low, almost trembling. "They threatened my daughter." One of his fellow soldiers, Sergeant Vega, knocked on the door. "Sir, everything okay?" David turned slowly, his face hard as stone. "No, Sergeant, not this time." "Do you need backup, sir?" Vega asked carefully. "I need a plane," he said simply. By the next morning, arrangements were already in motion. His team had seen the video too. They didn't ask questions. They just helped. Within hours, the colonel was on a military flight home, his uniform still on, his jaw set in silence. During the flight, he watched the video again and again. Every second burned into his memory. Every insult, every threat, every look of fear on Amara's face. He studied it like an enemy map. The soldier inside him wanted to explode. The father inside him wanted to hold her. Both parts agreed on one thing. No one hurts his daughter. When the plane finally landed, the sky over Atlanta was gray and heavy. Rain began to fall softly, as if the heavens themselves were mourning what had happened. David stepped off the plane with nothing but his duffel bag and determination in his eyes. He wasn't just coming home. He was coming for answers. And for the first time in years, the most feared Delta Force commander in the country wasn't going to war for his nation. He was going to war for his daughter. The morning sky over Atlanta was gray and heavy, clouds thick like smoke before a storm. The city was just waking up, unaware that something powerful had landed quietly at the airport, a man whose name alone carried weight across battlefields. Colonel David Johnson stepped off the transport plane wearing his military jacket, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His eyes were tired but cold. the kind of look that made even trained soldiers stand a little straighter. He didn't come home for medals or missions. He came home for Amara. The news had already spread across the internet overnight. Police threaten college student, video goes viral. People everywhere were sharing it. Comment sections burned with outrage and support. But the headlines didn't matter to David. He wasn't thinking like the world was. He was thinking like a father who had seen his child cornered and helpless. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He just moved with quiet precision, the same way he did before every mission. Calm, focused, deadly. As he walked through the airport, his phone buzzed constantly. Reporters, government officials, even people from the Pentagon wanting a statement. He ignored them all. His only message was to Amara, "I'm home. Don't worry, baby girl, I've got you." When he reached his car, he paused for a second, breathing deeply. He could feel the anger simmering beneath his skin, the same way he felt before combat, that sharp edge between control and chaos. But this wasn't a battlefield. It was home. And the enemy wore a badge. He drove through the city silently, his eyes fixed ahead. Every red light reflected across his face like flickers of fire. He replayed the video in his mind, the way they spoke to her, the way she trembled but still stood tall. That image of his daughter refusing to back down became his fuel. When he finally pulled into his neighborhood, Amara was waiting on the porch. She ran down the steps as soon as she saw him, her voice breaking. "Dad." He barely managed to smile before she fell into his arms. He held her tightly, so tightly it almost hurt. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just held her. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "You did good, baby girl. You kept your head." Amara's eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared, Dad. They treated me like I was nothing." He pulled back and looked into her eyes. The morning after Colonel Johnson's visit to the police station, the whole city of Atlanta seemed to buzz with a strange energy. Something was shifting, not just online, but in real life. The story that started on one quiet street had become a national storm overnight. Amara's video was everywhere, news channels, social media, and even morning talk shows. Hashtags like #Justice for Amara and Delta Force Dad flooded the internet. Millions of people were watching the clip of that brave young woman standing firm, refusing to back down, while 2 officers tried to break her spirit. For Amara, it all felt unreal. She sat at the kitchen table, her phone lighting up every few seconds with new notifications, messages from strangers, reporters, classmates, even celebrities. Everyone wanted to talk to her. Everyone had an opinion. But she didn't care about fame or attention. All she wanted was peace. And for people to know the truth. Her father sat across from her, silent, a cup of untouched coffee in his hands. He had barely slept. The lines on his face seemed deeper now, not from age, but from anger held back. "You okay?" he finally asked, his voice soft. Amara nodded slowly. "I think so. It still doesn't feel real." David leaned forward. "You were brave. You handled yourself better than some trained soldiers I've met." She smiled faintly, but it faded quickly. "Dad, what's going to happen to them?" He looked down at the table. "That depends on what they do next. And what we do." Just then there was a knock at the door. Amara flinched, her heart skipping a beat, but David's expression didn't change. He stood, his movements calm and precise, and opened the door. On the porch stood Chief Daniels, the same man from yesterday, this time without his confident posture. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, and his face carried the look of a man who hadn't slept either. Behind him stood 2 detectives and a woman holding a laptop. "Colonel Johnson," he said quietly, removing his hat. "We need to speak with you and your daughter." David didn't step aside yet. "About what?" "About the footage," the chief replied. "We've reviewed all the body cam and security footage from the scene." David narrowed his eyes. "And?" The chief exhaled slowly. "It matches her video. Everything your daughter said on it, it's true." Amara's breath caught. She had known that, of course, but hearing it from them still made her heart pound. "We've already placed Officers Miller and Harris on suspension," the chief continued. "Internal Affairs will begin a full investigation today. I want to personally apologize for what happened." David studied him for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he nodded once. "You should apologize to her, not me." The chief turned toward Amara, his voice sincere. "Miss Johnson, on behalf of the department, I'm deeply sorry. Those officers' actions were unacceptable." Amara looked at him quietly. "Thank you," she said softly. "But sorry doesn't erase fear." Her words hung in the air. The chief lowered his eyes. "You're right," he said quietly. "But I promise you, it won't be ignored." He handed David a folder. "Here's everything we've gathered so far. The reports, the camera footage, the witness statements. We're also meeting with the press later to make a public statement." David accepted the folder but didn't open it. "Good," he said. "Make it honest." After the officers left, Amara finally exhaled, feeling the weight in her chest lift just a little, but her father was still tense. He stood by the window looking out at the rain-slicked street. "You think this will change anything?" she asked. He turned slowly, his voice low. "It will, if we keep pushing." And push they did. Later that day, the story exploded even more. News anchors called Amara the girl who stood her ground. Interviews aired across every major channel. People praised her calmness, her strength, and the way she handled herself with grace under pressure. The police chief held a press conference, confirming the investigation and acknowledging serious misconduct. The world saw the full body cam footage, the shouting, the threats, the moment she pressed record. And then came the twist no one expected, the revelation of who her father was. When journalists discovered that Amara's father was Colonel David Johnson, one of the most decorated Delta Force commanders in the U.S. military, the internet went into overdrive. Headlines blazed across screens. Cops threatened the daughter of an elite military commander. Delta Force hero demands justice after police target his child. People were furious. Protests began forming downtown, demanding reform and accountability. But David didn't want chaos. He wanted justice. He stayed calm, never once giving in to the media frenzy. When reporters surrounded him outside his home, asking how he felt, he simply said, "I've fought for this country all my life. Now I am fighting for my daughter, and for every parent who fears their child won't come home." That line went viral too. It became a symbol, a father's voice that carried across the nation. Inside the house, Amara watched her dad on TV, tears quietly falling down her cheeks. Not because of the fame or attention, but because she realized something powerful. Her father didn't come home just to protect her. He came home to protect everyone like her, anyone who had ever been made to feel small, powerless, or voiceless. The truth had unfolded, and the whole world was watching. But for the Johnsons, this was more than news. It was personal. As the sun set again over the city, Amara sat by the window, her reflection glowing in the fading light. Her father stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. The storm had begun with fear, but now it was turning into something stronger, a fight for truth, justice, and respect. And Amara finally understood what her father meant when he said, "Real power isn't about control, it's about courage." That night, the truth wasn't just out there, it was unstoppable. Weeks passed since that terrifying night, but its echo still lived inside Amara's mind. Every time she drove past Maple Street, her heart beat a little faster. Every flashing light in the distance made her chest tighten for just a second. But she was learning how to live with the memory, not run from it. The world around her had changed. Her video had become more than a story. It had become a movement. People who had never met her were marching with signs that said, "Stand with Amara and justice for all." Schools invited her to speak. Journalists called her brave. But in her heart, she still felt like the same girl, the one who just wanted to go home safely that night. Her father, Colonel David Johnson, had returned to the base for a short time, but not before making sure the investigation was complete. The officers who threatened Amara were officially charged, one dismissed, the other under review. The department issued a formal apology on national television, and new training programs on respect and de-escalation were ordered citywide. Justice had arrived, not with violence or revenge, but with truth. Yet David wasn't celebrating. He wasn't the type to cheer for victory. He had seen too much in life to think justice was ever final. He believed it had to be protected, just like peace. One evening, as the summer sun melted into the horizon, David sat on the porch with Amara. The air was calm again. Crickets sang softly, and the world seemed to breathe normally for the first time in weeks. For a long time they didn't speak. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Finally, Amara broke it. "Dad, do you ever get tired of fighting?" David leaned back in his chair, staring at the darkening sky. "All the time," he said quietly. "But then I remember why I started." She turned to him, curious. "Why did you?" He smiled faintly, his eyes far away. "Because there's always someone worth protecting. Sometimes it's a country, sometimes it's a stranger. And sometimes," he looked at her, "it's your own child." Amara felt tears rise, but she blinked them away. "You've been protecting people your whole life, Dad. Maybe it's time someone protected you." He chuckled softly. "You already did, baby girl." She frowned. "Me? How?" He looked at her phone on the porch railing. The same phone that had captured everything that night. "You showed the world what courage looks like," he said. "You didn't fight with anger. You fought with calm. You didn't yell. You stood your ground. That's real strength." Amara smiled, remembering the fear that had gripped her that night. "I was terrified." "Good," he said. "Courage doesn't exist without fear." They sat in silence again, the warm breeze brushing past them. Inside the house, the TV played faintly, a news segment showing Amara's interview with a journalist. She was calm, clear, and confident. The interviewer called her a symbol of quiet power. But Amara didn't see herself that way. She wasn't trying to be famous, she was just trying to be heard. Her father looked at her again. "You know," he said slowly, "when your mom passed away, I promised I'd raise you to never be afraid of your own voice. She would have been proud of you, Amara." The mention of her mother brought a lump to Amara's throat. "I hope so." "She would," he said firmly. "Because you reminded this world of something important, that respect isn't given by a badge or a title. It's earned by humanity." As the night deepened, Amara looked up at the stars. "Dad, do you think people will really change?" He sighed softly. "Change doesn't happen overnight. But every truth told, every act of courage, it leaves a mark. And those marks add up. That's how change begins." Amara nodded quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Then I want to keep going," she said, "not just for me, and for others too." David smiled proudly. "That's my girl." A few days later, Amara stood on the steps of her college auditorium, facing a crowd of students and community members. Cameras flashed and voices murmured, but she wasn't nervous anymore. She spoke clearly, her voice steady. "That night changed my life. I was scared, but I learned something powerful. When you stand for truth, even fear starts to lose its power. My father taught me that courage doesn't shout, it stands. And when enough people stand, justice has no choice but to listen." The audience erupted in applause. Her father, standing in the back, didn't clap right away. He just smiled. It wasn't pride in fame. It was pride in legacy. Later that evening, as they drove home, Amara looked out the window at the glowing city lights. "Dad," she said softly, "I think I finally understand what you meant about strength." He glanced at her. "Oh yeah? What's that?" She smiled. "It's not about being fearless. It's about choosing to stand tall even when your voice shakes." David nodded, eyes glistening. "Exactly." They drove in silence again, the hum of the engine blending with the rhythm of their hearts. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft, cleansing, and full of promise. By the time they reached home, the storm had passed and the air was fresh. Amara stepped out of the car, looked up at the sky, and whispered to herself, "We made it." Behind her, her father locked the car and looked at her, not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as a proud father of a young woman who had faced the world and stood unbroken. That night they sat on the porch again, side by side, no words needed. The world now knew their story, a story of courage, love, and the power of truth. But for Amara and her father, it wasn't just a story, it was a legacy.